Everywhere I'd go, people would walk up and they would just pour their hearts out to me. And I said, do I have a sign on my back that says counselor? Arkansas was not big enough for me. The license plate says the land of opportunity. The first opportunity you get, we'd say, get out. And I knew that there was a world out there and I wanted to go see it.
Mary E. Bellafatto has worked in the mental health field for over 40 years and brings her years of training and experience in the field of addictions, eating disorders, and pastoral counseling into the brokenness of relationships. Mary has brought her work in reconciliation and trauma healing to Rwanda, East Congo, Burundi, Uganda, the Sudan, and the Far East. She's known for bringing a deep sense of spirituality to her work and a great sense of fun. Mary Bellafatto has worked at one of the top 10 addictions treatment centers in the nation as clinical director and director of national training and aftercare. Mary's the psychodrama trainer at Onsite in Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee. She maintains her practice in Naples, Florida.
Onsite is an organization out of Cumberland Furnace, which is near Nashville, Tennessee. I'm their psychodrama trainer. I do all of their programs there, their trauma, their living centered. They do a lot of workshops on grief and leadership. And it started out of the need to work with people in the industry who are coping with their own trauma and dealing with keeping them healthy as they help others. I am a psychodramatist and have been for over 20 years. And I do trainings in psychodrama and I specialize in trauma because years ago as I began to work with addictions, I realized that every person I was working with had some level of trauma. And I really wanted to be able to start getting to the heart of the issue and helping people resolve their traumas and moving on with life. So I have dedicated my life. I'm almost 75, but I do not plan on retiring. My goal is to leave this world used up, and I'm having more fun than I've ever had in my entire life. And I think my passion increases every year because I see people healing and really finding a new lease on life because they're walking through their pain and finding ways to deal with it and not just medicate it or put it aside. And that alone gives me passion. I also have been working in Africa and third world countries since 1998, and I go every year to give back. This past year I was in Rwanda working with human trafficking, young boys and young girls as young as 8 and 9 years old. And when you start watching these people heal through what I call the magic of psychodrama, there's nothing in me that would want to quit doing that. I did a workshop just yesterday here at this conference, and I spent the day working with about 25 professionals. And it was interesting, out of that 25 professionals, I would say 20 of them had trauma that they had not dealt with. And to me, that is so sad because we are a treatment industry. We are trying to treat people and bring them to a new place in recovery. And I don't believe that you can take a person where you haven't been. And it's sad to me that we are still struggling with this issue. And I just encourage each of them, find your help. Find what you need to do. Move beyond it. There's no reason for you to stay stuck when we have all of the treatment facilities and we have techniques that we didn't know 30 years ago about the brain and how to heal the brain. And I believe we all can live in passion every day, and that's why I do what I do and keep doing it. I got introduced to Africa. I actually went to Africa on a belated honeymoon in 1973. I went with my brother who at that time was a pastor of a big church, and he's always had a heart for Africa. And I went on a building program. Wouldn't recommend that for everybody on their honeymoon, but it made me fall in love with Africa. And little did I know that I was in Dar es Salaam at that time that was going to be the highest end that I ever hit in Africa, because the countries that I started showing up in 1998, the first one was Rwanda, after genocide. And my brother watched me do psychodrama, and he said, "Sis, you have got to bring this to Africa." He said, "The African people will love this. This is who they are. The color, the movement, the drama, the fun." And I said, "Okay, let's try it." So in 1998, my first encounter, I had about 400 African women who had survived, of course, genocide. Most of them had lost their husbands, their sons, their fathers, and most of them, I would say 98% of them, had probably been raped. And in Africa, if you have been raped, you don't talk about it, because if you do, you will be ostracized from the community and from your family. So I said, how am I going to help these women without talking about what happened to them? And so I said, "God, you got to help me out here. Just give me an idea." And all of a sudden, I thought of water. Water is a cleansing agent. So I talked about how the soul is lacerated by trauma, and emotionally how people get shut down and they're not able to find their passion and that life inside of them. So I set up basins of water in the room, and I started talking about, in Africa, a woman's hands are everything. They feed their babies, they till the soil, they cook the food on an open fire, they do everything. And someone said, "What do the men do?" And I said, "I haven't figured that out yet, but they stood under the tree a whole lot." So I said, "What has happened to you has happened by the hands of others, and you can't erase it. I know you can't talk about it." So I said, what I would encourage you to do today is we're going to use water as a symbol, and I want you to come dip your hands in the water as a symbol of letting go of all the dirt that has happened to you. And I waited. Nothing happened, and I thought, oh my God, this is not going to work. Now what? All of a sudden, the most beautiful, elegant woman, she had on a Nairobian dress, her hair, she had the head wrap, she was elegant. And she walked in front of that group from the back row, and she came right in front of me, and she just stuck her hands in the water very angrily. And she looked at me, and I just attuned my eyes to her and just held her gaze. And all of a sudden, 2 tears started down her cheek. And I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't bring any Kleenex. And I'm a psychodramatist. I have scarves that I use a lot to display emotions or whatever was needed. So I just grabbed a scarf and I began to wipe her tears. And when I did, this woman's soul opened up. There was a cry that came from her that I have never heard since. It literally, it felt like it just came from her feet up. And as she began to just groan, what happened was magical, because the women out of the audience came and began to wash her hands. For 3 hours, we watched these women come forward. We had 3 basins, and I had about 8 American women with me. And I said to them, once they're finished, let's dry their hands and hold them. Just give them a hug. And for 3 hours, we watched a miracle happen in that room. No words, just washing away what had happened. And then they began to sing and dance. And the African women carry these little purses that America sends over there that were our grandmother's purses in the 40s. They're very ugly. They have nothing in them but maybe a rag to wipe the sweat. But they all begin to put the purses on their head, and then they would begin to sing and dance, and then they would drop the purses. And I said to the interpreter, tell me the song. And he said, when I am clean, I will drop my burdens. And he said this was a song that they sang together. And we sat on the sidelines because I said, this is nothing about us. And that taught me then that if you can give people a tool, a way, something that's symbolic, a metaphor, they get that much easier than Americans do. And I begin to use all kinds of methods to help them heal, because you can't, there's no way I could open up the people in Rwanda and have each one of them talk about watching their families being macheted to death by sometimes their neighbors. And when I tell the story in America, people say, well, how could that? I said, don't judge it. I don't know what I would do if somebody came to my house and held a gun to my head and said, you have to kill your neighbor or we're going to kill your husband. I don't know what I would do. I'd like to think I know what I'd want to do, but you don't know. And those people felt like they had no choice. And many times they knew their killers. And they lived with them. They were their neighbors, their pastors, their friends. So in all of that, I spent the next 7 or 8 years going back every year doing trauma work, helping them find ways to do forgiveness for who did the killings and for themselves for what they didn't do, and also reconciliation. I will never forget, we had a group of men where we had Hutus and Tutsis all in the same group. And I decided, how do I work with them? So I came up with a foot washing. And one gentleman said, when I knelt down here to wash your feet, he said, I looked at you and you were the enemy. Because I'm a Hutu and you're a Tutsi, you were an enemy. But he says, as I begin to wash your feet, and I asked him, I said, and when you're finished, just put your hand on their knee and say a silent prayer that God will bless them as they move forward. And he said, as I touched your knee and I looked into your eyes, he said, I saw your pain. And I believe you saw my pain. And he said, in that moment, you were not my enemy, you were my brother. And how on earth could you ever bring that kind of connection? I probably think out of the box a little bit because I'm willing to take risks, because I believe ultimately there are 3 things that every human being wants and needs desperately. Can you see me? And I don't mean how old you are, what the size of your body, what the gender, but can you look beyond and see my soul? And can you hear me? Not what you think I'm saying, but can you really hear what I'm screaming and not uttering a word? And the last one, can you approve of me? So that's my philosophy of treatment, that I believe every client that sits in front of me and every human being that I work with, my goal is to see them, hear them, and find something that I can approve of, because the people who need to be seen don't show up. The people who need to be heard often don't speak. And the people who need our approval the most are making sure that they don't get it because of the way they're acting out. If therapists can look beyond and forget all the techniques and forget themselves, because often they're more concerned about what they're saying, and I said, it's not about you. And I think that's a sadness I see in the therapy world today, is that people feel like, okay, I'm so-and-so, I have this title, I've got these credentials, and we all have titles and credentials. They don't mean a whole lot. Sometimes the more credentials you have just means it's obvious of our insecurity. So if you forget that and go in and say, as one human being, I can attune to you, I can connect with you in such a way that I can help you for just a moment step over into secure attachment. And that's absolutely what heals us. When we no longer feel abandoned, we don't feel inadequate, at that moment we feel enough. When I was in high school, I remember sitting down with a guidance counselor because I had 2 things I wanted to do. I wanted to be a physician and wanted to be a counselor. And my guidance counselor said, oh, you don't want to go toward counseling. You need to really go toward the medical. So, University of Arkansas, my undergraduate was pre-med. And I applied and went and talked to all these schools, and every school, this was in the 60s, and they said, you don't want to come to med school because women come here to find a husband. And you're going to take a place of somebody. Now, those would have been suable cases, but at that time, that was reality. And my family did not have resources, so I knew I'd be working my way through med school like I did college. And I thought, well, maybe this is not what I want to do. So I kept fooling around with that for a few years and ended up getting accepted into pharmacy school. And I had a sister that died that last year of college, and because of her death, I decided I would take a trip to visit my brother in Maine. And when I went to Maine, I got a part-time job in a hospital and just got turned on. I was working with a pathologist, and he said, come on, help me do autopsies. And it's like all of a sudden the books became live, and I said, I don't want to go to pharmacy school. I don't want to put pills over a counter. So, and I think, again, that was God's intervention in my life, and I stayed on and had a wonderful job working for a company out of New York for about 10 years where we installed medical equipment. Everywhere I'd go, people would walk up and they would just pour their hearts out to me. And I said, do I have a sign on my back that says counselor? And I realized, yeah, I did. And, you know, I remembered when I was 8 years old, and I had a sister that was 3 years older than I, and she was 11, and we were standing, I was born and raised in Arkansas, under a big old oak tree on a hot summer day, and I looked up at the sky, and I saw this jet with a jet stream behind it, and I said, you know, when I get big, I said, I'm gonna fly in those all over the world, and I'm gonna talk to people. And she looked at me, she says, you're not either, you haven't even seen one of those. I said, yeah, I am. And she died about 3 years ago, and we recounted that conversation. She said, sis, I remember you saying that to me and thinking, are you nuts? And I said, I really believe that I had a sense that Arkansas was not big enough for me. And we used to laugh as kids because Arkansas, the license plate says the land of opportunity. The first opportunity you get, we'd say, get out. There's a longing to do more. I went back to school and got my master's and have never looked back. Became a psychodramatist. I've got about 14 years of training in psychodrama, and it's a method that fits my personality. And I add a lot of other techniques with it. I've just started brain spotting. I'm signing up for my second training in brain spotting. So many of these other methods work so well with psychodrama. And I think as we continue to go forward with all the new learnings and availabilities and methods to heal trauma, why wouldn't we learn them? And I challenge people. I had several people in my group yesterday in their 70s, and they're saying, well, we're kind of partially retired, but we still have a longing. I said, why quit? Go challenge yourself. Learn something new. Because I think what happens is people just get used to sitting in a chair, taking notes, taking money, and I'll see you next week. And I tell them, quit playing at therapy. Get in and do it. If you're not seeing people change, then I'll tell my clients, if you're not getting better, you need to find a new therapist. And when people come to me and say, I've had a therapist for 10 years, and I say, oh my goodness, you've helped them buy a house or a boat or a car, but what's happened to you? Well, I don't have as many anxiety attacks, but I still having them, and I'm still doing. I say, find a new therapist. Because I believe that it either works or it doesn't. Healing is possible, and that we can move on beyond our past, no matter what it is. Because I have helped people uncover some horrendous stories. And every human being has a story. And that's what I tell people. Tell your story. Yesterday, I had people tell their stories in complete silence. no words, looking in each other's eyes, and it was unbelievable what happened in that group. A couple of them said, "It's the most profound experience I've ever had in my life." And I said, "Then that's telling me your words are getting in the way. That you need to speak from your heart. And when your heart speaks its truth and it's heard by another human being, that attunement brings healing. And it changes trauma that's stored in the back brain and brings it over to the right brain where it can be healed." And to me, that's just a phenomenal. And I hope I never lose the awe of watching that happen. Because yesterday I was just so excited sitting there watching tears come down people's eyes as they didn't say a word. And they later said, "I know your story." And they told them what had happened, although there was no words. I often say if we have to depend on our justice system for justice, you're in trouble. Because I don't believe that a lot of justice takes place with our justice system. And that we get so cookie cutter mentality about, okay, this is where this happens, and then you do this and you do this. It's the same way in treatment. I tell people, yesterday I challenged them, I said, those of you who run treatment centers and you say, okay, when you leave here, you're going to 90 meetings in 90 days. We're going to take the thing that has made you be sane or feel sane, which is your medicator, and we're taking that away from you. And now we want to give you something really fun to do. We want you to go to 90 meetings in 90 days and talk to some weird guy about your feelings and being accountable. And I said, often what I know is that you'll go pick a sponsor very similar to somebody who abused you, mentally or emotionally. And I said, you're not giving anything back. And I think sometimes if you look at people in prison, and I've never worked closely with people in prison. I've worked with people who come out of prison and needed help. But I think we could help introduce some joy and some forgiveness for themselves. Because, again, I believe self-forgiveness rules so many trauma stories. They live in the trauma because they hadn't been able to forgive themselves. With all that craziness around, there is a part of the soul that is so innocent and so perfect and just wants to be heard and understood. And if you can reconnect a person back to themselves and find home, whatever home is for them, then you're going to help them find a recovery that is meaningful and has some passion in it. Because what I believe most addicts have not been able to connect with their gut. And by the gut, I mean their intuitiveness that says, do this. This is the correct thing. Don't do this. Because they feel like in my years of using, I've disconnected and I can't trust that anymore. Well, I think my goal as a therapist is to teach them how to come back home and trust that. Because when you trust that, then you know who you are. There's so many young therapists coming in now that have been trained just coming out of graduate school. Mm-hmm. And what I have started doing is taking them under my wing. They often call me Mother Mary. Because I believe I'm seeing an intelligence level that I have never seen with young therapists. I've often said, if I knew what you knew at that age, just wonder what I would have accomplished. So what I realize that they don't have is mentors. Someone that will say, you know, you need to work here. You need to realize that it's okay to ask for help. Because this new generation is it's a me generation. I can do it. I don't need anybody. And I think that's getting away from what makes us human, is that we do need help and we need other people. So I guess I want to be known for taking these young people under my wing and encouraging them, loving them, because so many of them have broken families. And I think A lot of people are drawn to this field because of their dysfunction in their families, and just helping them be loved and esteemed and just encouragement, because I really, really enjoy saying to somebody, man, you just blew that out of the water. And sometimes they will shadow me in a group, and I just back up and let them lead and sit down with them later and say, you did a great job here, you could make some improvement here. And I would have loved to have had that in my life, and I never had it. I just learned the hard way. And I had a lot of really lousy bosses. I knew what a lousy boss looked like, but I didn't know what a really good one looked like. So I think that's the legacy that I would like to leave. And what I love about Onsite is the owner, Miles Adcock, has said to me, I will help you, whatever you need for your legacy, I want to be a part of it. And I will give you room to be it. And I don't know many young men, and he is my mentor at 40-something. When I watch him lead, I thought, what an incredible leader. And I want to lead the same way. So, and then he's giving me room to do that, and letting me be my own entity, and yet being able to join them as a consultant. And it's just exciting.